I'm here with Belinda, and she's going to be sharing her testimony with us. Belinda, would you like to go ahead and get started?
Sure. I wanted to share my testimony because I wanted to talk about forgiveness. And I recently realized that there are a lot of people walking around hurting and holding on to a lot of guilt and unforgiveness and hating themselves for something they may have done. And it's something I've been doing for over 30 years. And I recently have been able to forgive myself for something that I've done. So I wanted to give my testimony and help people understand what led up to it. And maybe it'll help, my life will help somebody else in some way. And maybe they just want to talk about something. I'd be happy to talk with anybody about anything. God's given me a big heart filled with love. I didn't grow up in a household filled with love. My parents, my dad was in the military, so he wasn't always around. And my mother, unfortunately, suffered with mental illness. They call it bipolar, manic depression. But whenever I was young, and in the 60s, they didn't really have a name for it. As a matter of fact, her treatments were shock treatments and heavy medications. And my job when I was little was to keep Mom happy so that she didn't zone out or flip out. She could be very sweet and pleasant and loving one minute and totally snap out the next minute. I mean, literally go from one room. She could walk in the bathroom, and when she came out, she could be a maniac. She would be screaming about why the bathroom wasn't clean or why the towels were on the floor. It could be anything. It was a very scary place to grow up. She prided herself in the fact that I could eat an entire bowl of cold cereal without spilling a drop. And when I think back on it, at the age of 3 or 2, I think back on it, I wondered what it took for her to convince me to be that neat. She would always say, "Mommy needs you to do this, and Mommy needs you to do that." And the first time that she was hospitalized, that I'm aware of, was whenever I was 2. Apparently, I wasn't willing to say my bedtime prayers that evening, and she started beating on me and wouldn't stop. And my dad caught her. He just happened to come in and caught her, and he had to drag her off of me. He actually, the only time he ever hit her, he slapped her in the face because she was railing at him, explaining that I wouldn't say my bedtime prayers and I needed to behave and I needed to listen. And she just wouldn't stop. So kind of like slapped her to snap her out of it. I was removed from her care at that time, and my mom's sister, who already had 5 children and 6, and one of her children was, she had the German measles when she was pregnant, and one of her children was mentally retarded. I don't know if that's the right term these days. Excuse me. She couldn't hear or speak, but she took me on anyway for 6 months. And when I went back, I guess she was already expecting my sister. I was 3 years old when she was born. I then started trying to protect my sister from my mom. So I always took the heat. It's my job to take care of her, look after her. When she was first born, I guess within a week, my mom took my sister and I back to the hospital. I told them that my sister couldn't be her child because she cried all the time, and she pointed at me and said, "This is what my children act like." And so the hospital medicated both my sister, who was hyperactive, they called it, and my mother, and sent them home. I don't know how many times when we were little that we were removed from her care. My aunt said there were multiple times, and I don't remember all of them. I remember vividly being at my aunt's house. Silly things like she would dust off the wooden floors upstairs and shake the dust off out the window. I would be playing out in the yard on her swing set, and I played on the jungle gym in the front yard, and little boys would walk down the street and tease me on their way to school. Silly things. I had the chicken pox there. I remember the house exactly. I don't know how I recall that at that age. It was suggested to me that it was because it was normal, because it was just a normal household. We played and just got to be kids. Whereas my childhood was just stolen. I remember my dad's parents' house as well, very clearly. Even one of my aunt's 8x10 graduation pictures was on the nightstand in the room I napped in. It was just a tiny little bedroom. Just enough room for a single bed and a little nightstand. And my aunt's picture was on that nightstand. And my grandmother used to put strawberries in my cereal. And she put one little teaspoon of sugar in them. They came from Czechoslovakia, so they had strong accents. And she would put a teaspoon of sugar on my cereal, and then she'd get another scoop, start sprinkling on, and tell me, "Shush, don't tell your mom." And then my pap would later walk me down to the dime store, I guess, and buy me pixie sticks.
More sugar.
Or sugar. And then I even remember when I wore. I had brown corduroy pants and a matching like cream colored top with embroidered flowers. But he'd let me eat it all on the way back. And he'd brush off all the candy and throw the wrappers in the neighbor's trash. And he'd tell me, don't tell grandma. So I was getting plenty of sugar. But it was just normal. I was allowed to just be a little kid. But we lived in Nebraska. My dad was in the military. I was born here in McKeesport. And then we moved to Nebraska because of his service. And that's where a lot of the, I guess, things went sour because he wasn't home a lot. And it was always, "Mommy needs you to do this, and Mommy needs you to do that. Mommy needs you to be good." And she was always really harsh with me physically, but the mental and verbal abuse was really the worst. She would always tell me that I was ugly and I was a liar even when I was little, and that no one would ever want me or could ever love me. But I only ever tried to do what she needed me to do to try to gain her love. And I don't think my dad was really aware of a lot of what went on. But I always protected my sister. When she would kind of like go after my sister, I always was protecting her. She was like my own little baby, you know. But anyway, as time went on, we moved to Arizona, in Tucson. We lived in an apartment for a short amount of time, and then we built our own brand new house, a brand new housing plan, brand new school. Everything was new. And it was the late 60s, and like 1970, and my dad had to go to Vietnam. It was only supposed to be for a year. And then at first we were going to go with him. My dad told us all about this huts on stilts that we would live in. It was all like really exciting. But then there was a problem arose. There was a lot of robberies and break-ins because guys knew that the husbands are away. So at least that was the excuse. So we closed up our house, packed everything up, put it in storage, and we would ship back here to live with my grandfather for that year. And unfortunately, I was 9. It was like October, I turned 9 in July. I woke up one morning about a year later, and I ran downstairs and I told my mom I had this dream that my dad came home. She told me I wasn't dreaming, that he had been there during the night. And I said, when are we going to go home? Because I didn't like it here. Everything here was old. The school was old. Wood floors and big doors, and it echoed when the door slammed behind you, and it was dirty. The mills were still up, and I desperately wanted cowboy boots. I was waiting until I was old enough to be responsible to get my cowboy boots, and we were only here a few weeks, and my mom said, we're going to go shopping for boots. Well, I was elated because finally I was getting those boots. And we went to Sears, and I didn't see any cowboy boots. And she handed me these rubber boots with a zipper on it, a square toe. Well, I was in tears. And of course, she smacked me and told me to put the darn boots on. And those were the boots I was getting, and I just didn't get it. Well, of course, they were for snow, and everything was hilly, and there were potholes. And even getting ice cream was a drag. My uncle had a box stand, and the seats in the back were just milk crates. So he took us for ice cream, and the shocks were bad in the van. Well, ice cream was never a problem before because I was super neat. But we were going up and down the hill, and we hit a few potholes, and I'm trying to eat ice cream, go to the back, and help my sister not make a mess. Well, it was the most miserable ice cream cone I ever had. You know, so like every little thing just was miserable here. It just was no fun. And then I found out that we weren't going home. That my dad didn't want to stay with my mom anymore, and they were getting divorced. And so we moved into our own place, and Mom dated a few guys. One guy he drank vodka. He was in the Navy. And he would come home on weekends drunk before he got there and beat her. But he wanted us to watch. So he would get us up out of bed in the middle of the night to watch. So that wasn't great. And my dad found out because I told him one day. He came to the house, and she was on the phone with this guy, and my dad just walked out the door and headed for his car. Well, I knew this guy was going to be coming later, so I chased Dad out to the car and jumped in his car so we could just take off. And he said, you guys obviously like him better than you like me, and I just blurted out, oh no, he hits Mom. Well, that didn't go over. Dad ran in the house, got on the phone, told the guy he's never to come to this house again, and all of a sudden, Dad was my hero again. You know, he always was. I had him on a pedestal. And the guy never showed up again, and Mom and Dad seemed to be dating again. So life was a roller coaster. They didn't stay together. Dad, I don't blame him. Looking back, I can't blame him. After being away from her for so long, he didn't want to be with her. But being around us was a hassle because he came to see us and he had to put up with her and her yelling and screaming and whatever. It was misery. And anytime we needed anything, like I was going to be in a small play once in 4th grade, and we were going to get matching skirts. It was just a $5 skirt. Call your father. So I really wanted to do it. It was already planned. Everybody in the class had to do something. So I had to call him, and of course he started screaming at me. Everything was ahead. So we rarely saw him. But I desperately wanted to. He was a great dad before then. I mean, he built us a playhouse. He built us toy boxes. We always had projects together. He was, before he left, he was a great dad. And then my mom met a guy she really liked. She'd known him previously, and they started dating. I was about 11 when they started dating, and he became infatuated with me. She was extremely happy. She stopped being like a lunatic. Seemed she could control herself when she wanted something. And so he started molesting me sexually. And when I put my foot down, when I was like 13, he stopped coming. And she just snapped out. And that was how he manipulated me. He would just not come around if I made a fuss. And that went on until I was 17. And when she finally was made aware of it by a doctor, on the way home, she said, I told you to stop dressing that way. This is all your fault. And so she married him anyway. And I hooked up with the first guy that came around. He seemed nice enough and he was funny. And my mom insisted that we had to live together before we got married. That was her thing. You have to live with him. So we got an apartment and we lived together. That was the end of August. And I was just not comfortable at all, just living together. Then I found out his dad was furious. So I said, just let's go get a marriage license. We're just going to get married. And on the way back from getting our certificate, marriage certificate or license, we stopped at a Goodwill store and there were wedding gowns. And I was like, try that one on. Just happened to be very similar to one I'd seen in a magazine that I had really, really liked. Well, of course it fit perfectly, but we didn't have $50. We were broke. He was laid off. I told my stepdad we were getting married, and he's like, well, you have to have something. So we had a little reception at the house. And we got married October 18th. And the first time he punched me in the face was New Year's Eve.
Oh, my.
And so that became a regular thing. I actually got a small business, a beauty salon. He would come every day and take the cash out of the register. And he would constantly want to go to parties. I'm trying to run a business. But he would make me go with him. And one Friday night, we were at a friend's house. It was a party. And he promised that I could go home early. So it was about 11:30, quarter to 12, and I asked him if he could go. I didn't decide to go. And he just had enough to drink. He just swung around with the heel of his hand and hit me in the nose, shoved my sinuses up in my forehead, knocked me out. When I came to, he was kicking me with these boots, and people were dragging him off of me. So after that, I decided I had enough, but I wasn't aware that I had become pregnant during the last assault. So I kind of was in denial about being pregnant for like 4 months. I kept thinking I had the flu. But once I heard that baby's heartbeat, there was just no, that was it. I was hooked. I just didn't know what I would do. So I was already stashing money. He kept finding it. I hid it behind pictures. And he would just find everything. He knocked one of the pictures off the wall and blew apart. I only had like $25, but I was working in an all-night diner, and we lived in 10th Ward in the house that my stepdad financed. It was only $4,000, but we remodeled the inside. And I worked in Glassport, and he wouldn't let me take the car. He wouldn't ride me, so I had to walk to work. So eventually I had the baby, and I used cloth diapers because they were more economical. Our dryer broke. And he wouldn't let me use the car to go to laundromat Glassport, so I had to carry wet diapers down. And I came home one day, and I was still working at how I was going to get away from him. I found a used condom on my bed, and that was well, the night before he had hit the baby. She was only like 2 months old. She had, pacifier, and she had knocked it out of her mouth, and she had done it 2 times previously, and he was trying to watch something on TV, so it annoyed him. So he hit her really hard. So then the next day I come home and found that, so that was it. When I was able to, I got one of the cars running, and I went to my mother's house, knocked on the door, and I told her that the bruises and the broken nose was not an accident. And she looked at me and she goes, well, where are you going to go? I had the baby in my arms. And I kind of looked at her and I said, what? She says, well, I told you the day you got married, you made your bed and now you lie. Where do you think you're going to go? And my stepdad moved her gently out of the way and said, she is where she's going to go. Come in this house. We have 2 extra bedrooms, a ridiculous amount of spaces. Let her in. So I stayed there for a few months until I could get him out of the house because it was mine. My stepdad's, and he paid everything all day. When I got back in the house, all the utilities were run up, and they came to shut the gas on, the electric. The phone was already off. So I worked through that. And then he started stalking me. He followed me everywhere. First it was the sound of his exhaust. I could hear that coming. And then he realized I could hear him coming and I'd be prepared. So he'd park his car where far enough away to walk. So I could hear the sound of his footsteps. I don't know if anybody seen Silence of the Enemy with Julia Roberts. I can't remember the name of the movie. It was the same thing. I would come home and all my tea towels would be lined up and my shoes would be lined up. He was breaking in my house when I wasn't home. So we eventually worked that out. Because I eventually found out how he was getting in through the basement window. I called him up and met him up at a place called the Wagon Wheel on Glassport Elizabeth Road at the time. I asked him if he'd like to be scared. And I told him I was tired of being scared. And I started kicking him with my little boots. I started kicking him and punching him. And he said, you're scaring me. And I said, well, how do you like it? I'm tired of being scared. I'm not going to be scared anymore. And through everything, from the time I was little, I never hated. God gave me a heart of love. I don't know where I learned it. I had it from because I wasn't getting it. And even though I went through all that with my first husband, they arranged for me to be able to see his daughter on a regular basis. I kept an eye on things, made sure he wasn't abusing her. But I wanted her to make up her own mind. After that, I tried to seek counseling because I was terrified that I would end up like my mother. And they wanted to, right away, put me on medication. They told me it would be years, and I needed a psychiatrist, and I told the counselor, I said, no, I don't, medication for what? I'm clear-headed. I just don't want to go down that path and be like my mother, and I know you know how I can avoid it. I don't want to ruin my child's life. And I told her, well, obviously you can't help me. Before I left, she finally said, yes, I can help you. And so she explained to me that I had to get away from my mother at a distance and learn to see how she manipulated me, how to see it right away, because it was learned behavior. And I actually did learn and start to move away from her. I worked at that diner for a long time until I found something different. And then I met Kevin. He was saved. I actually was in a couple other relationships that were bad. Bad when you started. They're just being used. You know, some guys can be really sweet, say all the right things. But they're liars. Those kind of guys are. But then I met Kevin. I don't know if he was lying to me. I really don't know at this point. But his family, he was quadriplegic, safe relationship. His family was very supportive. We became engaged. We were together for 7 years until he had a bad reaction to some cold medication. He's very sensitive to medications. He called me before he took the medication, told me he was afraid to take the medication. But his dad was so agitated after going to the doctor that day, going to the pharmacy to get it, that he ended up taking it anyway. He had a seizure. They ended up putting him on, quote, enough meds to paralyze him completely. And he ended up with brain damage. I stayed at the hospital for about 3.5 weeks. Something like that. And eventually his parents wouldn't let me in to see him if they weren't there. Because he had begged me while we dated to promise if he ever ended up on a respirator that I would take him out, end his life. He was terrified that his parents would let that happen. And I was sure after his earlier life when he was stuck on a respirator, and his parents knew his fear that they would never let that happen. But I was only his fiance, and when they talked about it and I spoke up, I was just his fiance and I had no say. He ended up with brain damage. I went back in and they called me after he got off the respirator again. They asked me to come and see it. He kept asking me, do I really know you? Parents kept saying, yeah, she's your fiance. We've been together for 7 years. We've been to college. He had no clue who I was. He did finally get a loss, so. And he died a few days later. One of his friends came to the hospital while he still was in ICU in a coma. He came in and out of the coma. Some of the nurses would let me in to see him because he would ask and he would wake up. They would let me in the middle of the night. So he wasn't completely out of it. He would beg me to take him out. He wanted to die. But one of his friends showed up while he was, just before they got him on the ICU, I guess. Of course, I had no clue. He was a little older than me. But he came to the hospital and he started asking me about going home. I probably should go home. And he just was sweet talking me over and over. And frankly, I'm guessing at this point from what I figured out that his brother probably sent him. Somebody sent him. And then, he was my best friend. He was all loving. He told me that he was in the middle to the end of his divorce. Just a matter of signing the papers. And foolishly, I fell into his arms and I had a relationship with him. And I became pregnant. And once I spoke to him about being pregnant, he was no longer my friend. Suddenly, the divorce wasn't near the end. He wanted to work it out with his wife. And I absolutely was not to have this child. It would ruin his life. I had to have an abortion according to him. I'm absolutely not the person who would have an abortion. But I panicked. I made a very rash decision. And I had an abortion. And I'm going to tell you, it is not anything I can tell you. Planned Parenthood is a liar. There are women walking around right now carrying guilt and heartache over having abortions. When I went in there, they asked me if I wanted a sedative, and I asked them, what's the difference? And they said the difference is the time you have to stay afterwards. If you have a sedative, you have to stay for at least 30 minutes to an hour until it wears off. Without a sedative, you can leave whenever you want. Well, this guy drove me down, but he wanted out of there as fast as he could get out. So I elected not to have a sedative. So I know exactly what goes on. They take you into a room. They tell you to take your shoes and pants off, underwear. They tell you to get up onto a stainless steel table and put your feet into the stirrups. When they come back, the 3 people that came back, the one that I assumed was a physician of some sort, was laughing as if they were having a joke on the way back in. And the girl that had me change kind of motioned that I was wide awake. So they got quiet. One of the assistants held my shoulders down to the table, and the other one held my knees down to the stirrups. And then the machine turned on. It sounds like a very, very loud vacuum. And then they sucked my child, God's child, out of my body. It only takes a few minutes. It was ripped from my body. My baby was ripped from my body. And then 2 of them left the room, and the other girl kind of wiped me off and told me, pointed to the other room where I could go after I got dressed. And of course they put some big pad on. I said, can I go? She said, yeah, go sit down for me. So I went into the other room. There were probably a dozen cots, girls laying in many of them, kind of passed out looking. And I sat on one of the cots, just looking. They didn't have a clue. I waited for maybe 5 minutes. I don't know if it seemed that long, and I left. The guy said, you probably didn't even do it. That was awful fast. me so fast. He dropped me off, and then that night I moved to my apartment in Boston. See, I had been renting from Kevin's brother. He came and asked me for my engagement ring and the keys to my car. And he explained to me, we basically knew you were never faithful to Kevin. How could you be? See, they were all lying to me. They weren't really there. They were doing like they always did, just appeasing Kevin's wishes, because they all felt guilty because of the accident he was in. You see, it was the first time he was allowed to ride home from their camp with his brother, and their parents were following when the accident happened. So his brother felt guilty because of the accident, and his parents felt bad for letting him ride with his brother, who wasn't very much older than him, really just a young kid driving home. I mean, the guilt was always obvious in that house. I let my daughter know while I sat in that hospital. I left her with either my mother or my ex-mother-in-law, who wasn't much better than my mother. And then I had to tell her that Kevin was dead. I was pretty useless after that. But you see, God already knew what I was going to do. He already had a plan. He already sent my husband, Fred. See, I needed a home. And my stepdad, as bad as his actions were at one time, had corrected his mistakes. He sought help. And he stopped molesting children. And recommended Freddie to help me find a car. So we become friends. I didn't know that we were more than friends, only he knew. He was just very supportive. He knew that I had just come through some serious stuff. And when he finally admitted that he had a crush on me, I was pretty relieved. I've been really struggling to forgive myself for this. I didn't know what hate was until I killed my own child. I hated myself for a long time. I knew in my heart, I knew in my head that God forgives. But I just couldn't get it. I couldn't accept it for myself. And I know there's a lot of people. There's a lot of women out there that have had abortions that are walking around with that pain. And there's a lot of people that are holding on to something. Don't do it. Friends of mine, the ladies in my church, have helped me. I heard one of them say, if God won't hold it against me, why should I? It was so important that she said that. She kind of said it in a flippant manner, but it was so important that she said it. But he was. Because I never really had family. All of my family has rejected me or dropped the ball in some way. Please don't hold on to that. I'm forgiven, and I accept that now.
Tell us about your t-shirt.
This t-shirt, I gave this testimony a couple weeks ago, and Satan decided we're going to keep that recording. But that was the first day I wore this t-shirt. I've had it for over a year. I've gotten it out of the closet and hung it up in the bathroom, ready to wear it numerous times. I've not been able to put it on until now, a couple weeks ago, and now again today. And I wore it a few times in between now, because I just couldn't. I didn't feel or accept the forgiveness because I killed my own child. But I want people to know that Planned Parenthood is a horrible place. And if there's anything we can do to deter people, grandparents, parents, we have to let them know that there are people out there waiting for a child. We have to turn it around. That can't be the first answer. It's terrible. It's terrible and it's cold, and they lie about it. It's awful. And I'll never be able to get that memory out of my head. God has a reason for that. And God has a purpose for the life I've lived. God was with me the entire time. When I was being molested, He lifted me. I remember I was lifted up out of that situation into a safe place. When my stepfather, shortly before he passed away, he was sitting in a wheelchair on oxygen, and the pad on the foot pedal or something needed adjusted or fixed. And I knelt down there, and he reached out and grasped onto my hand, and he said, I know I shouldn't ask you this, and I don't deserve it. But is there any way, not now, but any way, someday in the future, you could think about forgiving me for ruining your childhood? And without hesitation, I smiled up at him, was able to say, I've already forgiven you. But please, you need to have someone to forgive you. That's merciful. And I know he did. He died a couple of days later. It might have been the next night. It was very soon right after.
Well, Belinda, as you share, you share a story. God brought you through many things. Abuse as a child, sexual abuse, mental abuse, drugs, the abortion, and everything. And if you could leave one thing with people just as it relates to accepting forgiveness, to be able to forgive themselves, what would you say? Like, how did you come to the place to say, I'm going to finally forgive myself?
I know when I was with the ladies a couple of weeks ago, I went home that night and I was just suddenly hey, I can let this go now. I don't need to hold on to this anymore. I don't need to hate myself anymore. I realized that I never hated before that. I never hated anybody or anything, but that hate was self-hate. And it affected my relationships. It affected everything about me. It affected how I saw things in the world. And to be able to let go of that and see things in a new light is just amazing.
Amen.
I have such a peace about it.
By the grace of God.